And now to a Fox News alert. The hits keep coming. NBC at it again. This time their cable outlet has reported what it says is President Trump's tax returns from the year 2005. The White House has responded tonight. Trace Gallagher is here with the details. Hey, Trace.
And we're kind of watching Rachel Maddow as she goes on here, Tucker. And what we're learning is that she so far has revealed very little, if anything, about these taxes, saying that they were uncovered by an investigative reporter and that, in fact, the big mystery here is how these things surfaced in the first place. And maybe that would lead to further avenues of reporting. We know, as you said, the taxes are from 2005. That's the year that Donald Trump married Melania. And that's the year he shut down his controversial Trump University. It was also his second year on The Apprentice on NBC. The White House tonight responded to MSNBC saying that in 2005, Donald Trump paid $38 million in taxes on $150 million in income, and that he paid no more than he was legally required. Now, the White House went on to say, and we're quoting here, "You know you are desperate," referring to MSNBC, "you know you are desperate for ratings when you are willing to violate the law to push a story about 2 pages of tax returns from over a decade ago." Of course, income wouldn't be the big revelation here, considering that we know in 1995, Mr. Trump declared a $916 million loss, which would have allowed him to legally avoid paying any taxes for up to 18 years. Also on the show, we expect in the next few minutes will be this Trump biographer and investigative journalist David K. Johnston, who is the one who apparently obtained these tax returns. He was billed as also being a financial and tax expert reporter. Last year, Johnston is also the one, you may recall, who asked the New York Attorney General to investigate Trump's charitable foundation as well as his tax returns. What journalists have been actively looking for in any of these tax returns or documents is any financial ties, particularly suspect financial ties, maybe even to Russia. Donald Trump has maintained the only ones interested in his tax returns are reporters, and that he would not release his returns while he's being audited. The IRS, we should note, has said that an audit does not prevent someone from releasing tax documents. The White House goes on to say it is totally illegal to publish tax returns and is bashing the, quote, dishonest media. We are continuing to monitor anything that might come out of these 2 pages of tax returns from 2005. So far, very little has been revealed. Tucker.
Thanks a lot, Trace. We're joined now by our colleague Kimberly Guilfoyle. She is also an attorney. Kimberly, there's a lot about this story we don't know. It's unfolding even as we speak. But the White House somehow had foreknowledge of this before it aired. It's airing right now on another channel. How do you think, where did this come from? What's the backstory? Any idea?
Well, I was listening in my other ear to Rachel Maddow, to her program, and basically she said there was a subject of an investigation. Investigative reporter provided this information. As an attorney, I will tell you that I would begin to question right away the legality of this, how they were able to obtain this, and clearly this is another political move to try to discredit the presidency of Donald Trump, so it comes as no surprise to anybody that politics is at play here. Trace is right, and he said in his reporting to you that, in fact, there was some kind of nefarious relationship, is what Rachel Maddow is saying, between Donald Trump and a Russian oligarch that purchased a home for $100 million. And she said, why was there all of a sudden this windfall of an additional $60 million more than the house was originally worth at $40 million? So trying to say, again, to tie into the Russian narrative, that there's some kind of untoward conduct, that perhaps that should be looked at. Because other than that, what you see is that Donald Trump is a very wealthy man. Shocking. Donald Trump paid a lot of money in taxes, some $38 million in taxes that year. So what else is there to say that's really that shocking or revealing? She has a couple pages of it, so she's going through that. And again, it's primarily focusing on what was this real estate transaction, and that was the last thing that she was talking about, and trying to make some kind of connection there, some nexus, and then of course tying in. And she even mentioned Wilbur Ross and past jobs that he's had, trying to tie it into the Trump administration.
Right. Who was seen, I think, on the grassy knoll If anything, this sort of highlights the need for tax reform. So 38 million on 150, if legal, and they're saying it is, no one's alleging otherwise, is a much lower rate than I pay. So there's that.
And
but
he has suggested, in fact, tax reforms himself, you know, in terms of saying what people should be able to pay, et cetera. So to me, I'm not sure. I mean, perhaps they're going to get to more on the story here.
Right.
But obviously, yes, this is an attempt at a ratings grab, an attempt also to try to, again, like, poke the cage politically and, you know, stir the pot as it relates to the Russian relationship, which you've seen that really heavily covered by the mainstream media, you know, almost every single day to the point of exhaustion. And that's what we're seeing right now again. So to me, so far, legally, there doesn't appear to be any impropriety whatsoever as it relates to the return, which was properly filed based on the tax laws at the time.
Right. Was it properly obtained, though? That's the question. I think most of us file our taxes and imagine they're kind of private information, sacrosanct, actually. So how would something like this become public?
So she's saying that somebody has turned this over to them or to the powers that be at MSNBC or to her team. She's an investigative journalism, but somebody should get to the bottom of this because the IRS or other people, this is just, again, more of a story we've been covering, which is leaks, more leaks. Who, in fact, would turn over this private and confidential privileged information? They're doing so at their own peril, because if you find out who did this, there could be serious, you know, legality issues here. And also, I'd be concerned, you know, as a journalist, if you proffer this information and essentially publish somebody's tax returns and their private information.
Yeah, I mean, what's ironic, of course, is I think a lot of people in the press assumed that President Trump had paid nothing in taxes. That was certainly the allegation, and he didn't really deny it, actually, during the campaign. Here you have him paying 38 million on 150. Well, final question, is there any scenario that you can think of where a tax return might be public, other than if it was released by the person who filed it?
Yeah, other than somebody filing it themselves, no. But she doesn't have the complete return. So there's just a couple pages that she's focusing on, I believe, like the 1040 statement. So, you know, we'll have to see what the rest of the reporting on it, you know, reveals. But right now, the headline, the thrust of it was Russia, real estate, oligarch, like, you know, buzzwords that they're using to try to demonize and scare everyone. But they like to throw out the oligarch thing because that, like, makes everybody shock and awe.
Russia.
Right, Russia.
KG, it's great to see you tonight. Thank you for that.
Just don't say KGB.
I will not say KGB.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, we're joined now by Joe Concha, who writes about media for The Hill newspaper here in Washington. So, Joe, great to see you. We opened the show tonight with a story that I think is significant. It's come to our attention, and it's true, that NBC brass, the people who run it, Andy Lack, who runs the news division, knew that the famous Access Hollywood tape was being leaked to the Washington Post, that it was done intentionally because they wanted to distance themselves from Trump, but they wanted to hurt Trump before the presidential debate 2 days later. Does that come as a shock to you, who covers television?
Well, first I have to push back a little bit. We don't know definitively that Andy Lack had knowledge of that. I understand that it's scuttlebutt within our bubble, but we don't have a definitive report or confirmation on that.
I can say that definitively, yes.
Okay, you could say that.
Yes.
I'm hesitant to do that.
Right.
Look, I would think that given that tape, Access Hollywood, bombshell revelations, would have not only changed the presidential election, but the entire course of the country forever. Think of Trump, Clinton, the different agendas, Supreme Court justice, you go down the line. It is huge. And I would think, I get it's 11 years later and you got to connect a lot of dots and go back, but you at least try, and you at least try to do an internal investigation to figure out where that tape went, because I'm sure that more than a couple people know exactly what happened there, and you at least make the effort. But from what I can tell, that effort hasn't been made, or it hasn't been made public that it's been made. And I would think if they did make an investigation, they would make that known to the public.
Well, and we asked them today that exact question. Where's your internal investigation? And they refused comment. I mean, look, if someone stole the biggest news story of the year out of your office, you might want to find out how that happened. But the bigger, if you take 3 steps back, story is this. Here, a news organization had this tape, and no one's claiming the tape wasn't real. President Trump said what he said on the tape. Sure. I'm not defending it. But that was their intellectual property. They owned it, and yet they surreptitiously fed it to another news organization. Can you think of any precedent for that? Have you ever seen anything like that or heard of anything like that ever?
No, I've never seen that actually happen, Tucker. But you know, I'm sure that NBC News would have wanted their hands on it first, and how it got to the Washington Post. Again, that's what investigations are for, and that's why you conduct them. But, you know, this is how things are now in news, Tucker, in terms of reporters asking people to commit illegal acts and leak information. Nicholas Kristof, and I asked your producers right before I came on, can you put together this tweet real quick that he put out last week? Nicholas Kristof won Pulitzers at the New York Times, and he actually solicited information on Twitter saying, please send Donald Trump's tax returns. There it is on screen. Here's the New York Times address. And he asked the IRS to do that, an employee there. You know what that is, Tucker? When you actually steal and leak that kind of information, if you're an employee, a federal employee, it's a felony. And you have journalists asking regular people to commit felonies in order to advance a story, a narrative. It's sick. And the New York Times executive editor, Dean Baquet, also said last year he was willing to go to jail for 5 years if he could get Trump's tax returns. So he is setting the example at the paper of record that illegal acts and leaks should happen if we can get the story. And that is the sad state of journalism in 2017.
Well, and not just journalism. I mean, speaking for myself, I always want more information, almost no matter where. You know, if Satan handed me relevant information, I'd run with it because it's the information that matters. What I'm struck by and frightened by is the idea that federal employees who have so much of our information, intimate information, and they safeguard it, supposedly, we pay them to do that, would be leaking in order to hurt people they disagree with politically. That's scary. From behind a cloak of anonymity. I mean, that's when you get government trying to destroy people on the basis of difference of belief. I mean, I can't imagine anything scarier than that.
No, it should be very alarming for everybody out there. And with this report on MSNBC tonight as far as the 2005 tax returns, the real story I can see so far is that those got leaked by somebody, not what's in them, as far as I can tell, unless they're saving it for the end of the show. And that's what should be the lead story tomorrow, not what's in them. And I'll be very curious to see exactly what the New York Times and Washington Post and all of traditional media lead with in this situation.
Well, I mean, and sort of bring it back to the first story very quickly. So the Access Hollywood tape breaks end of the first week of October, right before that debate.
October 7th, yeah.
Exactly, in St. Louis. And in the kerfuffle over it, I didn't hear anybody ask the obvious question of NBC, which is, hey, this is your tape. You've had it for 11 years. You knew it existed. How did the Washington Post get it? Why did nobody ask that obvious question of a news organization? Because
everybody loved the narrative. Everybody saw that as the end of Donald Trump, and that blotted out the sun, and no one bothered to say, hey, where did that come from, by the way? So, look, this happened once before, by the way, and I know you got to go soon. 2004, remember what happened with Dan Rather? And he does that report on George W. Bush and his guard service, and it was based on forged documents. CBS at least did an internal investigation, and they had accountability shown there as Dan Rather was shown the door. And that's what you got to do in these situations. Find where the leak is and show that you care. That's all I ask.
It's just what's interesting to me that news executives are so partisan or feel it their mission to destroy a politician. And this is not a defense of any specific politician, only a defense of traditional journalism where you're not partisan, that they would feel that so overwhelmingly that they would give up a big story, that they would hurt one of their own employees because they're that committed to the cause of getting a specific person elected. Like, that's the behavior of a political consultant, not of a news division chief.
Let's put it this way, Tucker. Jorge Ramos won a Walter Cronkite Award yesterday. Jorge Ramos is a known advocate. He is not an anchor.
That's right.
But he has a mission, and the mission is to take down Donald Trump at every chance he can. So then the people behind the Walter Cronkite Award, which is obviously an iconic name in this business, and they say, we're going to give it to Jorge Ramos, not because he's doing good journalism, because we agree with the message. And that's the state of journalism today, where it's all about the narrative and not about the responsibilities that we're supposed to have, which is to be objective. Here's what Ramos said last year. He said neutrality is not an option when it comes to Donald Trump, and he gets a Walter Cronkite Award.
Right, and the problem is not that they have opinions. I have tons of opinions. The problem is
you're not an anchor.
You're so emotionally engaged in a story that you can't see it clearly. You should not be covering it. If you're waking up in the middle of the night in rage over something, whoa, back off a little bit, and these people aren't. Will you stay right there for a second? I want you to react to this. This here is the full statement from a senior administration official about tonight and about those tax returns from 2005. We're quoting now. Okay. You know you are desperate for ratings when you're willing to violate the law to push a story about 2 pages of tax returns from over a decade ago. Before being elected president, Mr. Trump was one of the most successful businessmen in the world, with a responsibility to his company, his family, and his employees to pay no more tax than legally required. That being said, Mr. Trump paid $38 million even after taking into account large-scale depreciation for construction on an income of more than $150 million. as well as paying tens of millions of dollars in other taxes, such as sales and excise taxes and employment taxes. And this illegally published return proves just that. Despite the substantial income figure and tax paid, it is totally illegal to steal and publish tax returns. The dishonest media can continue to make this part of their agenda, while the president will focus on his, which includes tax reform that will benefit all Americans. So there you have it.
You know what the irony is there, Tucker, from what I can see so far, unless, again, they're saving something for the end of that show in terms of what they're going to reveal. This is a boomerang effect. And it's supposed to be something, an object thrown at Donald Trump to hurt him. And instead, it's going to come right back, and this will hurt media and the people against Trump even further, because this, as far as I can tell, is a nothing burger. Unless there's something else there that I'm missing, this is going to have the same boomerang effect that his 95 tax returns had during the election, where everybody said, see, Donald Trump, you didn't pay a lot of taxes. And Trump actually turned it, I think, into a positive, where he said, yeah, I know the tax system. I didn't pay what I didn't have to pay. And people are almost applauding, like, yeah, I would do the same thing. So that's the effect I think seeing here. When you try too hard to go after somebody, it's a boomerang effect. You end up hurting yourself.
Yeah, it makes me anxious for tax reform. Under 30%, I look on in envy as it counts. But, you know, it's more than zero, which is what a lot of people thought. Joe, thanks a lot for this. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.